Hello world of YouTube and welcome to the listening log update for February of 2020. We've got 12 albums to talk about. It's a pretty decent haul, some new stuff, some stuff that friends were hyping up, some stuff I was curious about. We had a lot to talk about. And I got the one request I had up to this point done, so hey, we pretty much covered it all. Let's go ahead and get started.
NASCAR transport, just what you asked for. Don't ask me what I asked for if you can't.
This album had promise upon the start. I really like the first couple of tracks, Funeral, Mahogany. I even like I Do It. I think Big Sean's decent on that cut. And I like the instrumentals on those songs. So these really dark, lurky trap beats that I think suit the harsh, reality that, or the really brutal, imagery Lil Wayne is spitting on those tracks. And I'd even go so far as to say that some of the tracks near the end of the record also aren't that bad, but this record is one way too fucking long. It is another excessively bloated project in hip-hop that doesn't need about half of its subject matter here. I had a similar issue with Lil Wayne's last project, The Carter 5, but this, while seemingly a little more focused, where it focuses its ideas come up even shorter than some of the ideas explored on the Carter 5. I think a lot of the features on here don't do anything for me. I think some of them are misplaced, like the Adam Levine feature, who sticks out like a sore fucking thumb. I think 2 Chainz phones it in a pretty decent amount on his track. I think that him continuing to dig up XXXTentacion's grave and throw another acapella that he found onto a project just isn't in good taste. While the track is a lot more aggressively tinged and fits against some of the imagery in the beginning, the track itself leaves an incredibly bitter taste in your mouth. This record tries to do a lot under the guise of trap, but it's not as successful at sticking in the landing as, say, an artist like Denzel Curry is at accomplishing something that is both parts aggressive and melodic at the same time. Wayne needs to just needed a man behind him to help him phone it in, because that's a big problem I have with Wayne's projects across the board. I think by and large, when he's not ratcheting it in and keeping it tight, he is going way off the deep end, because it's not just a problem with this project or his last project. There's a handful of things in his catalog, whether it's too many skits or a lack of direction, that bog down his projects by and large. And it's projects like Funeral that really cement why I don't appreciate Wayne to the same caliber that a lot of my contemporaries who love hip-hop do. I also think that his delivery doesn't work. He's done the auto-tune drenched vocals before. Again, it's a big part of his shtick, but on this project, they just sound poorly meshed with some of these darker instrumentals, and it leads to a project that just feels rough around all of its edges in ways that I do not enjoy. Again, when he's trying to phone for something a lot more serious or paint himself in a really darker image, I think it works on a handful of occasions on here, but it falls way too flat for me to give this even just a medium tepid rating. I'm giving this a 4. It's really underwhelming, and I don't think it's really worth your time as a Wayne. If you're a Wayne fan, I feel like cherry pick the songs that you really enjoy and leave the rest on the cutting room floor. Obviously, if you've caught some of the Patreon stuff I'm doing, I'm reformatting all of my old discography reviews in the new format. And Green Day is one of those, and I'll be doing that relatively soon because they've put out a handful of records, a couple of records since I did my discography review, and it'll be nice to have my opinions on the discography in one nice, tight video. And spoilers for that, this will be pretty low in my rankings. I do not like Father of All Motherfuckers as a whole. While I liked Dose for its dabblings into the whole garage rock realm, even with its own low points, this record just does it even worse than Dose did, in my opinion. It's obvious this is trying to be a more Foxborough Hot Tubsy project. A lot of critics are saying that. I mean, it's a garage rock record by Green Day. It's kind of hard to not throw that label out there, but this record feels lazier than Dose did, and that had multiple tributes to an artist that never really did anything huge after their glimpse with Green Day. I feel like some of the hooks on here are some of the worst in Green Day's career, like Oh Yeah, with its monotonous attempts at trying to get the crowd going, or I Was a Teenager. Again, lazy is the best word I can use to describe a hook like that. I think the title track, while ambitious vocally, because Billy Joe doesn't really use his falsetto much, I think it's a sound that is an acquired taste. There are moments on here that I enjoy. I like the hook of Stab You in the Heart, and I like the guitar line on that. I kind of like Fire Ready A-M-OK. It's a track that I feel like could have popped in 2007 just fine. And I think that there's moments of Graffitia that you can tell what they were trying to do, but I feel like still fell just a little bit short. The production on this record doesn't really sound all that great. Everything sounds really just overproduced in the worst way. A lot of the production in here are issues that I had with parts of the trilogy and of records like 21st Century Breakdown. Not that I think that this is on the same level as 21st Century. I do think that this is worse than that. I'd argue this is for sure one of their worst projects. Some of the songs feel underwritten. I know that they're a punk band, but these type of songs don't lend themselves all that well to this type of song structure and writing. I just feel like this is a misguided attempt at doing something different by the band. Some have said that it's them just trying to work their way out of a contract by churning out one last turd, and it definitely reeks of that, but even with that in mind, this is just a rough record. I don't like this thing, by and large. It's a record that I've sat with and continue to just have this allergic aversion to. I'd much rather listen to anything else the band has put out for the most part, and out of their garage rocky-centric records, I prefer Dose over this, even with Dose's low points. I'm giving this a 3 out of 10. Really bad release on Green Day's part, and I'm going to go ahead and just move on to something I like more. You know, before this, Squarepusher was not a name that I would say I was super familiar with. I had heard him on what had to have been soundtrack inclusions and maybe some remixes, because I could not tell you a single project of his before this point. My buddy CJ told me to check out this project, Be Up a Hello, because I like this type of music. You know, I like Aphex Twin, I like Venetian Snares, I like the whole kind of drill and bass IDM scene. I've talked about electronic music by and large since I brought back discussing music on the channel, and I'm happy that I have, because I'm always open to listening to stuff like this. And on Be Up a Hello, I feel like Squarepusher does a decent job at sort of bringing this sort of breakcore into a contemporary setting. You know, a lot of the synth tones on here reminded me of the 2016 Venetian Snares record, Traditional Synthesizer Music. It has that same kind of nostalgic vibe to it, and it could help that also there's just a lot of breakcore on here. And I think it kicks off on a decent foot with the first couple of tracks, Uber Love and Hit Sonu, who do a good job at integrating these ambient synths with these sort of harsh, sporadic percussions before really kicking it up and not letting you go for the next run of the record of Nerve Levers through Voltrack, which do a good job at creating these jittery percussions with this sort of vintage feel. I really love the intensity on Speed Crank. I think it's a really jittery, erratic electronic song that just has these pulsing, pummeling synths that do a great job at picking up the intensity in the right way that keep me intrigued. And I think that it does a pretty good job at continuing that momentum until really the end of the album, with the last two tracks, Merkev Bass and Adion Dula, creating this sort of unnecessarily elongated ambient experience. Not necessarily Merkev Bass. Merkev Bass is just like 4 minutes too long, and Adion Dula just lets the record kind of fizzle away in a really uninteresting fashion. You know, I enjoyed this project for a decent amount of its runtime, but every re-listen I had to it, I just kind of stopped it before it was over, because I didn't really want to hear the last leg of the record. You know, I think that once it gets going, it's really nice to listen to. And again, it gave me very old school sounds and vibes, but man, I wish it was just a little bit better. There's elements of it that just hold it back from greatness. You know, I don't think it's terrible, and I don't think it's really mediocre, because the parts that I enjoy, I genuinely really love. But I think that it just needs that extra oomph to get it over the edge in a way that I feel like could have been done better. I'm giving this record a 7 out of 10. It's really solid. If you like breakcore and IDM, you'll probably like a handful of this project, but you definitely won't enjoy your experience as a whole, if you ask me.
Baby, how many times you not listen?
I was excited for this project because I liked Roux's first 2 records. I think that they were incredibly well written, very punchy pop music. And her second record did a good job at sort of maturing that in a sort of laid-back sense. And on Supervision, I don't know what happened. This record is so much more underwhelming than I was expecting it to be. While I wouldn't say I had the highest of hopes for Father of All, I would not say that I was anticipating it. This, I'm pretty disappointed in. I would argue this is one of the bigger disappointments I've seen of the year so far. You know, and it comes down in a lot of ways to its mixing. I think the mixing on this project is rough in a lot of instances where I feel like it shouldn't be, given this artist's previous work. You know, there's tracks that I enjoy, like Do You Feel? The bridge of Do You Feel is so great. The build to it is just the right length, and there's a moment where the second set of vocals come in that just complete the song. But man, is the mixing just off on that song. And there's a couple of instances like that, like an Automatic Driver. The song takes too long to get to the groove that you want it to get to, and when it gets there, again, the mixing is just off. Everything feels flat in a way that does not suit this style of throwback synth funk pop music. You know, where Janelle Monáe really shined in harnessing this sound and making it work on Dirty Computer, Roux does not have the same grace. You know, and it also comes down to the vocal delivery. Some of the vocal deliveries on here are not good. I hated International Women's of Leisure vocals. They are grating. The falsetto that she uses just doesn't sit well with me. And it could again be because of the mixing and how they recorded it, but it sits in a place that is uncomfortable to listen to for how long it goes on for. You know, and I feel like a lot of the record itself sits in this sort of monotonous funk because of the mixing. You know, the guitars on 21st Century should pop a lot more than they do. They feel so stiff and rigid. It's like a robot's interpretation of funk, and not in a Daft Punk twerp sort of way. It is so far removed from what I love about this genre that it's staggering. And following a couple of years where we've had some really great revivals of synth funk and throwback funk and tributes to, say, Prince in this caliber, or in this lane, this does not stick the landing in the same way. And even the hooks on a handful of these cuts, I really enjoy, but they don't stick in a way that I would want because of the mixing. Everything I Live For spices it up in a way and injects some sounds that I wish I could hear more in the track listing, because by the time it gets to this point in the record, you've sat through a very similar sounding taste for a majority of the record, whether it be a build to a guitar line that fits the pocket well, but doesn't do a whole lot to change up things. Tracks like Everything I Live For and He Rides do a decent job at trying to spice that up, but because everything is so whimpered and neutral, nothing gets a chance to shine outside of the vocals, which honestly underwhelm in a handful of instances. I was really disappointed with this release, and I was hoping that Roux would deliver with something much better, but it isn't here. I'm giving this a 5. It's incredibly underwhelming, and again, I liked it better when Janelle Monáe did it in 2018.
They on my mind. Think about your
You know, I don't think anybody was expecting Nicholas Jard to continue with the Against All Logic moniker, even though 2012 through 2017 was incredibly successful for him and was this sort of critical darling in the scene. But here we are, 2 years later, 3 years later, technically, with a follow-up in the form of 2017 through 2019, a project that sees the moniker, sees Nicholas Jard taking the ideas seen on the last project of these really tight grooves with a lot of sample work infused into that, pushing it forward a little more, with tracks like Faith and Penny that are still really serene, but still laden with lots of dance-centric grooves, and injecting the sample work seen on that in very different ways, like on Fantasy, which is a little more akin to that project, but if you can't do it good, do it hard, having a much more liberal use of its sample, like what was seen on the last project, with this Lydia Lunch sample being woven throughout the track so religiously, but also using these ideas of groove-centric electronic music in much more experimental ways, like on the very abrasive D-Furs, which is one of the more harsh cuts that this project has done yet, and juxtaposing that with You Forever, which is the closer, it just takes a lot more methodical, ambient approach to this type of music, and I enjoy every aspect of this record for the most part. I think some of the tracks, like Alarm, just kind of feels like a waste of 2 minutes. It feels like a sort of cut that I would have liked to have seen cooked together a little more. And I feel like If Loving You Is Wrong could have been elongated a little more, could have done a little more to spice it up. It's still a really good track, but it's one of the more underwhelming cuts on this project to me personally. But by and large, I like this project a lot. I think that it's another great release under this project, and I like that he's taking, again, these sort of sample-centric grooves, or these just electronic dance grooves in general, and pushing them further along to a place that was both surprising and just continued that excellence furthermore. I like this a lot, giving it an 8. I think it's really worth your time. If you liked 2012 through 2017, you'll like 2017 through 2019 a lot. Another surprising, consistently good electronic release from this project. And honestly, if he's gonna keep doing it, I hope he does more under this moniker, because he's putting out some good shit, man. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't at least a little bit curious as to where Kevin Parker would take Tame Impala post Currence's blooming success and post his collaboration with Gaga on Joanne, which I think came together pretty stinking well on Perfect Illusion. But what's funny is I haven't been following his progress up to this point. I hadn't listened to anything he dropped before the Slow Rush. I just kind of sank my teeth into the pool of this record, and I left a little underwhelmed. I was wanting something a little more than this. Not to say that he's coming off of my favorite Tame Impala project. I like Currents, but I wouldn't say it's my favorite project. But I think it's fine. I think that some parts of the scene are a little too harsh on it, and some a little too positive on it. I think it's really solid. I think it's like a 7 out of 10 record, but I do like the Slow Rush a little bit less. I think that it has great ideas, and I like the production for the most part. But I think that on some tracks, like Breathe Deeper, which is still a better use of its longer runtime, play out its ideas by the end of the track. I like the hook of Breathe Deeper, but I got sick of it by the end of the track. But there are some songs where he just does nothing with his sort of ambitious undertaking of a long length. Like Posthumous Forgiveness or Tomorrow's Dust, 2 tracks in particular that I felt like went on for just way too long. And the opener, One More Year, while also having a pretty decent hook, I got sick of it and was ready for something to change. Something to change in the song or the track listing, because it was just too slow of a burn for me personally. I like psychedelic music. I like music washed in really trippy production, and I think there's moments where that comes together really well, like on It Might Be Time or on Track. I love the production of both of those songs. I feel like for a handful of the tracks on this record, I walked away way before the track was done. I was sick of it. Posthumous Forgiveness in particular is just a song that just goes on for just like 3 minutes too long. But that's not to say that there aren't tracks that I actually genuinely love. I love Borderline's hook. Like I said, I like Breathe Deeper's hook until I hear it for like the 10th time in the song. But Borderline is pretty much a perfect track. It Might Be Time, when it kind of opens up and the fuzzy, lush production buries away to something a lot more bare. It's a great moment that the song builds to incredibly well. I also like tracks like Is It True? And the closer, One More Hour, also does a decent job at using its length to create something worthwhile. But I feel like on the Slow Rush, Kevin Parker kind of falls victim to a hubris just a little bit, you know, and I feel like it's hard to follow up something with such huge success like Currents, but I was hoping for something a little better than this. I'm giving this a 6 out of 10. Far from the worst thing I've heard this month or this year so far, but still a little bit of a disappointment.
Double indecision, daring.
I feel like post this record's critical success in its scene, because a lot of reviewers that review this type of music have been talking about this record, and I feel like this record is going to create a place for artists to catch up to in the coming years, because Brave Faces Everyone is a harsh, stark contrast to a lot of what the scene is producing. Not to say that the scene has been putting out bad releases. I've enjoyed a handful of records from this current crop of pop punk, but Brave Faces Everyone presents a lot of issues that are stirred up in the current era in a very classic way. The production on this record feels very indebted to 2000s emo and pop punk, with a lot more edge on the punkier leaning side. I like a lot of the writing on this. The writing on here feels so very true and very resonant to a lot of people that may deal with anxiety or depression, or just generally have been growing up in the current landscape we live in. The performances on here are incredibly real and visceral in a way that is a lot more punk than pop punk. I checked out this record purely because a lot of my friends were giving it praise in ways that I'd seen them giving the new Pup record praise, and I was like, okay, I like pop punk, but I'm kind of a cynical asshole now. Let me check this record out and see how much I enjoy it. And I even walked away a little gobsmacked and am frustrated that it is not getting the exposure that bands that have been getting exposure in the current crop of pop punk have been getting, because this is a much better written project. While I enjoyed stuff like Morbid Stuff and how it spun a lot of negative feelings into a relatively positive scope sonically, I like how this sits in this realm of sadness and misery and frustration with the world in a way that I have been wanting from this type of pop punk. I enjoy the genre by and large. It's something that I don't talk about a whole lot because it's something that I feel like has been giving me personally diminishing returns, but this record in particular just nails it perfectly. Whether it's the incredible build-up in the opener routine pain that bleeds into the second track, Self-Destruction, that almost acts like a second mantra, a hope for something better, but still remaining in such a cynical place, or the really catchy songs like Beachfront Property or Generation Loss that, again, have that scathing, real lyricism that I just am clamoring for. This record gets it. It nails it on the head in the best way possible. And I know a lot of people are riding this hype train, and I'm seemingly just another voice in that. But I'm serious. They're alright. Listen to this record if you enjoy stuff of this ilk. You will not walk away disappointed. It is incredibly gratifying to hear something genuinely frustrated with how things are and wanting it to change, but feeling in the pit of your stomach that they just won't. I'm giving this a 10. I'm jumping into that boat. It is genuinely that good.
In my final hour, I will never cower. Even with guns in my...
Unlocked sees Denzel Curry come together with Kenny Beats on a project that is actually incredibly good. A lot of the glitchy production suits Denzel in a way that his other projects haven't tapped into. A lot of the track listing is full of these dope verses from Denzel that you would expect from him from this point, like Take It Back or Layup or the closer Cosmic by having a little more of an open soundscape. And a lot of the sample work and pace of the project feels very in line with Madville, and a lot of people are throwing that comparison out there. But my biggest issue with this project, and the crux of it all, is that it's so fucking short. It is so incredibly short. It sits at only 17, almost 18 minutes. And I want so much more from this project. It is the biggest thing holding it back from a higher rating. It is incredible. I love the production. Kenny Beats pulls together some really cool shit. He mixes some really cool samples in a glitchy way that hits me in a very real sense. And I love Denzel on here, because Denzel is Denzel. I think he's one of the best rappers to pop in the tail end of the decade. I've said that multiple times in my tenure on here, and I'll be saying it again at one point later this month. But I just want more, damn it. Like, this project is a huge tease. It is the biggest tease the year has given us so far, because it shows that Denzel can hop on this type of production and make it work. He can expand his sonic palette even farther, and he doesn't have to sacrifice his ability to craft an incredible verse or a catchy chorus or some true flames like on Pyro, where he's channeling something so different. He's channeling his roots of DMX incredibly well, or he's channeling his ODB sensibilities on a handful of parts of this record. This album goes hard when it wants to, and it's, God, it just begs for more, and they just give us just a glimmer. Here's to hoping it leads to something more, but I doubt it really will. Either way, I'm still giving this an 8, because it's fucking amazing. I just wish it were like 3 times longer than this.
Good girls know how to get hot, do ya?
I enjoyed Rainbow when it came out. I thought it was an incredibly powerful record from an artist that I felt like got better as she continued to make music. I liked Kesha's, the later half of Kesha's party stuff more than the early stuff. I think the early stuff is fine enough as it is. And there's some singles that she's dropped that I'll admit I think are pretty okay. But I think the tail end of her party side, or at least the first half of her career, the first part, I don't want to say half, first part of her career was great. And I was curious after Rainbow where she would go from here. Raising Hell seemingly had glimpses of older Kesha in a more mature fashion, and I was wondering if we would get that instead of a little more of a refined version of Rainbow. And that we really do get just more old Kesha in a mature sense on High Road. And I'm not necessarily against that. And I feel like she utilizes better production as a whole on this project to create a very self-indulgent experience. I feel like Rainbow was her purging her demons, and now she is ready to live life again. And I'm happy for her, you know. Not to say everything comes together incredibly well, but I do like the opener tonight. I like how it kind of plays as a red herring. I like the sentiment of My Own Dance. I don't necessarily like the hook of My Own Dance. I love Raising Hell. I think it's a great fucking song. And I like that she still takes the time to bring together ballads like on Cowboy Blues or Resentment. I like Resentment. I think it's a nice enough song. I think that it gets a little too self-indulgent at points. I don't necessarily like songs like Kinky or the Potato Song. I feel like Kesha really is just throwing it all out there. You know, she is incredibly all over the place, whether she's being sentimental or reflective or horny. And while I enjoy horny Kesha at points, it just gets to be a bit much by the end of this record. I also really like Honey. I don't mind the Say It Ain't So riff. I think that it's a fucking funny song. It's a genuinely hilarious song that just, again, embodies everything this record is aiming to be. This record is aiming to be a 7-layer cake full of so many different vibrant flavors. It's fattening. It's full of just sugary sweetness. And it's something that Kesha wants you to wolf down in one sitting. And I can respect that. I don't necessarily love it as a whole, but I respect the attempt at it. I'm giving this a 7. I don't like it as much as Rainbow, but I like it a little more than some of her records from her earlier career that I didn't necessarily enjoy. The newest Loathe project, I Let It In, It Took Everything, was a request by Lil Waterpump, a frequent viewer of the channel, and thank you for the request. They asked if they weren't sure if I covered metalcore on the channel, and I enjoy metalcore. I don't think it's a genre that I cover by and large all that much, because I feel like I got a lot of my enjoyment out of it 10 years ago. But when it stands to impress, I usually walk away still pretty satisfied. There's some bands that people throw in the metalcore camp that, like Lamb of God, that I don't think really fit that moniker. But if you consider them metalcore, they're one of the bands that I really enjoy that still does it. But on Loathe's newest project, they seemingly tried to adapt sounds that bands like Code Orange were playing with on their last record, with their thick, meaty riffs that just outright assault the listener in big, fat, chugga riffs, juxtaposed with really serene, lush sounds a la what bands like Astronoid are touring with, but with a lot more of a Deftones influence, which definitely comes to shine on tracks like Two-Way Mirror, which do a good job at breakup tracks like New Faces in the Dark or Broken Vision Rhythm, which just, like I said, pummel the listener with big meaty riffs and screamed vocals. Now there are tracks that strike a balance, like Screaming, that have the dense, thick riffs, but the serene vocals, and those are nice, harmonious marriages of the sounds that the band have split for a handful of the record. My biggest issue with it are some of the interludes don't really do a whole lot for me. I think the opener theme is fine. There's some pretty sounds on 451 Days and on Red Room, but I just wanted more out of these calmer moments. I felt like they could have utilized their band in a way that made it seem less one note in those sequences. But the record as a whole is pretty solid. I feel like if you enjoy heavy metal and you like, big fat riffs but aren't opposed to when a band like that breaks it up with some really lush sounding soundscapes, I think you'll enjoy this. I think this is a really solid release, and I thank you for the request. I dug this. I dug this a lot. I'm also a sucker for the Deftones, though, so it's kind of hard to not please me if you resemble anything like that, if you're not being overtly carbon copy. I'm giving this a 7. It's pretty alright.
Through our days, our nights, ain't no repercussions.
And I'll be upfront, I'm not the biggest Justin Bieber fan. I've thought a lot of his earlier material was just really bland pop music, and his performances were never really outstanding to me. I feel like on purpose he was trying to shift in a more mature direction, and I feel like he nailed it down in a couple of tracks, but on Changes he seemingly backpedals back into that juvenile adolescence that got him popular to begin with. A lot of the writing on this record tries to be mature, but it doesn't necessarily hit the nail on the head. Like on Come Around Me, he's just dancing around saying the word fuck, and it's obnoxious. Or it's just really herky-jerky and awkward, like on Yummy or on Habitual. I feel like he's trying to aim for something very serious on a handful of these cuts. Some of the instrumentals, like on ETA, some of the instrumentals, when they're not being incredibly boring and samey, like a majority of the trap-flavored stuff is on here, he's trying to aim for something serious, like on the guitars of ETA, or on the, Psychedelic Infused Travis Scott cut, Second Emotion. There's just a whole bunch of mediocrity throughout this entire project that Justin Bieber doesn't do anything to spice up. Even a lot of his features don't really spice it up much. I mean, Quavo, Post, Dickie, and Travis Scott all phone in some really underwhelming performances on here as well, and Justin Bieber doesn't have the strength on his own to make these songs charismatic. He's trying to make these adult slow jams without the writing to back it, and a lot of these instrumentals blur together in just a menagerie of gray and monotony. I really don't like this record. I think it's pretty bad. Even some of the tracks or textures in the production that I do like don't have a consistent thread. throughout the entire project. I'm personally going to be giving this a 2 out of 10. It's really bad, guys. It's really not
good.
So I'm a pretty adamant fan of Sepultura. I am, like most people, a bigger fan of their earlier work than their post-Cavalera work, but I think that they've done a good job at putting out some records in that post-Cavalera run of their career. I enjoyed Dante XXI around the time it came out. I think Alex is pretty solid, and I do think that since the beginning of this decade, they've been building themselves back up to a pretty average state. I enjoyed their last record, Machine Messiah, pretty well. I thought it was a solid-ass record, and Quadra is just a little bit better, you know? And that could be because the writing is a little more consistent, it's a little more cohesive, and the performances across the board are just pretty nice. There's a lot of the flavoring you would expect from a Sepultura record. You know, there's traditional accompaniment, like on Capital Enslavement, or on the small interlude title track. There's grand symphonics on tracks like Guardians of the Earth, you know, and there's this huge sense of scale to a lot of the sounds on here. But I think that they balance that with consistent conceptual writing, good theming, and generally really tight performances. I like this record a lot. You know, I don't mind when it gets a little flashy at points either, like on the track Last Time, which has this kind of arpeggiated guitars that play throughout the song. I think that it's a solid-ass record. If you've enjoyed music of this ilk and you haven't really dove into this album, you probably would get some enjoyment out of it, you know? I think my biggest issue with it is some of the production is a little milquetoast. It's a little of its ilk. Not to say it doesn't feel cacophonous or erratic like on the track Isolation. They do strike a nice balance at points, but it's not a consistency that I would look for in this type of music. Again, the band is firing on some pretty decent cylinders on here. I like the bleakness in a lot of the sounds and the lyrics. It's very chaotic and apocalyptic at points, but I want just a little more. They're almost there. You know, I get why it is how it is, especially with how grand some of the record gets to, and I don't mind the moments when it gets super grand and self-indulgent, but I don't know, I felt like it could have just done with a little more of a dirtying up of the mix, you know, because some of these riffs are pretty solid and pretty heavy, but they could do with just a little more to me personally. But again, the writing is consistent. It's got this huge sense of dread throughout the project that I think works really well for the band's favor, and this is one of the better records that I've heard from them in a decent amount of time. I think it's pretty solid. I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. Again, if you like thrashy music, if you like Sepultura, or you like their earlier work and you haven't listened to them in a while, check this out. It's better than a lot of the records of the last couple of years. And that's my listening log update. What did you think of it? Was a record that you enjoyed on here? Did I disagree with you? Let me know in those comments down below. If there is an album you would like for me to check out on this segment, suggested in the description, suggested in the comments down below, linked in the description is my listening log if you want to check it out, see what I have up on my list, what's on my radar, all that sort of stuff. I'm going to get out of here. Thank you so much for watching. If you did like this video, be sure to give it a like. If you would like to see more of my music, gaming, and general nerdery content, be sure to subscribe. Special thanks to my patrons if you would like to join their ranks. Linked in the description is my Patreon. I've been Viral Rack. You guys have good days, lives, and situations, and I'll see you another day.